Chapter 1 The Big Winner. I won dribble at Jimmy Fargo's birthday party. All the other guys got to take home goldfish in little plastic bags. I won them because I guessed there were 348 jelly beans in Mrs. Fargo's jar. Really, there were 423, she later told us. Still, my guess was the closest. Peter Warren Hatcher is the biggest winner, Mrs. Fargo announced. At first I felt bad I didn't get a goldfish too. Then Jimmy handed me a glass bowl. Inside there was some water and 3 rocks. A tiny green turtle was sleeping on the biggest rock. All the other guys looked at their goldfish. I knew what they were thinking. They wished they could have had a tiny green turtle too. I named my turtle Dribble as I was walking home from Jimmy's party. I lived at 25 West 68th Street. It's an old apartment building, but it's got one of the best elevators in New York City. There are mirrors all around. You can see yourself from every angle. There's a soft cushioned bench to sit on if you're too tired to stand. The elevator operator's name is Henry Bellheimer. He lets us call him Henry because Bellheimer is very hard to say. Our apartment's on the 12th floor, but I don't have to tell Henry. He already knows. He knows everyone in the building. He's that smart. He even knows that I'm 9 and in the 4th grade. I showed him Dribble right away. I won him at a birthday party, I said. Henry smiled. Your mother's going to be surprised. Henry was right. My mother was really surprised. Her mouth opened when I said, just look at what I won at Jimmy Fargo's birthday party. I held up my tiny green turtle. I already named him Dribble. Isn't that a great name for a turtle? My mother made a face. I don't like the way he smells, she said. What do you mean? I asked. I put my nose right down close to him. I didn't smell anything but turtle. So Dribble smells like turtle, I thought. Well, he's supposed to. That's what he is. And I'm not going to take care of him either, my mother added. Of course you're not, I told her. He's my turtle, and I'm the one who's going to take care of him. You're going to change his water and clean out his bowl and feed him and all that? She asked. Yes, I said, and even more. I'm going to see to it that he's happy. At this time, my mother made a funny noise, like a groan. I went into my bedroom. I put Dribble on the top of my dresser. I tried to pet him and tell him that he would be happy living with me. But it isn't that easy to pet a turtle. They aren't soft and furry, and they don't lick at you or anything. Still, I had my very own pet at last. Later, when I sat down at the dinner table, my mother said, I smell turtle. Peter, go and scrub your hands. Some people might think that my mother is my biggest problem. She doesn't like turtles, and she's always telling me to scrub my hands. That doesn't mean just run them underwater. Scrub means I'm supposed to use soap and rub my hands together. Then I have to rinse and dry them. I have to know by now, but I've heard it enough. But my mother isn't my biggest problem. Neither is my father. He spends a lot of time watching commercials on TV. That's because he's in advertising business. These days, his favorite commercial is the one about Juicio. He wrote it himself. And the president of Juicio liked it so much that he sent my father a whole crate of Juicio for our family to drink. It tastes like a combination of oranges, pineapples, grapefruits, pears, and bananas. And if you want to know the truth, I'm getting pretty sick of drinking it. But Juicio isn't my biggest problem either. My biggest problem is my brother, Farley Drexel Hatcher. He's 2.5 years old. Everybody calls him Fudge. I feel sorry for him if he's going to grow up with a name like Fudge, but I don't say a word. It's none of my business. Fudge is always in my way. He messes up everything he sees. And when he gets mad, he throws himself flat on the floor and screams, and he kicks, and he bangs his fist. The only time I really like him is when he's sleeping. He sucks 4 fingers on his left hand and makes a slurping noise. When Fudge saw Dribble, he said, Oh, see? I said, That's my turtle. Get it? Mine. You don't touch him. Fudge said, No touch? And he laughed like crazy. Chapter 2 Mr. and Mrs. Juicio. One night, my father came home from the office all excited. He told us that Mr. and Mrs. Jarvie were coming to New York. He's the president of Juicio Company. He lives in Chicago. I wonder if he'd bring my father another crate of Juicio. If he did, I'd probably be drinking it for the rest of my life. Just thinking about it's enough to make my stomach hurt. My father said he invited Mr. and Mrs. Jarvie to stay with us. My mother wanted to know why they couldn't stay at a hotel like most people who come to New York. My father said they could, but he didn't want them to. He thought they'd be more comfortable staying with us. My mother said that was about the silliest thing she'd ever heard. But she fixed up Fudge's bedroom for our guests. She put fancy sheets and a brand new blanket on the hide-a-bed. That's the sofa that opens up into a bed at night. It's in Fudge's room because it used to be our den. Before he was born, we watched TV in there, and a lot of times Grandma slept over in the hide-a-bed. Now we watch TV right in the living room, and Grandma doesn't sleep over very often. My mother moved Fudge's crib into my room. He's going to get a regular bed when he's 3, my mother says. There's a lot of reasons I don't like to sleep in the same room as Fudge, though. I found out that 2 months ago when my bedroom was being painted, I had to sleep in Fudge's room for 3 nights because the paint smell made me cough. For one thing, he talks in his sleep, and if a person didn't know better, a person could get scared. Another thing is that the slurping noises he makes. It's true I like to hear it when I'm awake, but when I'm trying to fall asleep, I like things very quiet. When I complained about having to sleep with Fudge, my mother said, "It's just for 2 nights, Peter." "I'll sleep in the living room," I suggested. "On the sofa, or even the chair." "No," my mother said. "You will sleep in your bedroom, in your own bed." There was no point of arguing. My mother wasn't going to change her mind. She spent the days in the kitchen. She really cooked up a storm. She used so many pots and pans, Fudge didn't have any left to bang together. And that's one of his favorite pastimes, banging pots and pans together. A person could get an awful headache listening to that racket. Right after lunch, my mother opened up the dinner table. We don't have a separate dining room. When we have company over for dinner, we eat at one end of the living room. When my mother finished setting up the table, she put a silver bowl filled with flowers right in the middle. I said, "Hey, Mom, it looks like you're expecting the president or something." "Very funny, Peter," my mother answered. Sometimes my mother laughs crazy at my jokes. Other times she pretends not to get 'em. And then there are times when I know she gets them, but she doesn't seem to like 'em. This was one of those times. So I decided no more jokes until after dinner. I went to Jimmy Fargo's for the afternoon. I came home around 4 o'clock. I found my mother standing over the dinner table mumbling. Fudge was on the floor playing with my father's socks. I'm not sure why he likes socks so much. But if you give him a few pairs, he'll play quietly for an hour. I said, "Hi, Mom, I'm home." "I'm missing 2 flowers," my mother said. I don't know how she noticed that 2 flowers were missing from her silver bowl, because there was at least a dozen of them left. But sure enough, when I checked, I saw 2 stems with nothing on them. "Don't look at me, Mom," I said. "What would I do with 2 measly flowers?" So we both looked at Fudge. "Did you take Mommy's pretty flowers?" my mother asked him. "No take," Fudge said. He was chewing on something. "What's in your mouth?" my mother asked. Fudge didn't answer. "Show Mommy." "No show," Fudge said. "Oh, yes." My mother picked him up and forced his mouth open. She fished out a rose petal. "What did you do with Mommy's flowers?" She raised her voice. She was getting really upset. Fudge laughed. "Tell Mommy." "Yum," Fudge said. "Yummy, yummy, yummy." "Oh, no!" my mother cried, rushing to the telephone. She called Dr. Cone. She told him that Fudge ate 2 flowers. This Dr. Cone must have asked what kind, because my mother said roses, I think. I can't be sure. One might have been a daisy. There was a long pause while my mother listened to what Dr. Cone had said. Then Mom said, "Thank you, Dr. Cone." She hung up. "No more flowers," she told Fudge. "You understand?" "No more," Fudge repeated. "No more, no more, no more." My mother gave him a spoonful of peppermint-flavored medicine, the kind I take when I have a stomach pain. Then she carried Fudge off to have his bath. "Leave it to my brother to eat flowers." I wondered how they tasted. Maybe they're delicious and I don't know it because I never tasted one, I thought. I decided to find out. I picked off one of the petals from the pink rose, put it in my mouth and tried to chew it up, but I couldn't do it. It tasted awful. I spit it out in the garbage. Well, at least now I know I wasn't missing out on anything great. Fudge ate his supper in the kitchen before our company arrived. While he was eating, I heard my mother remind him, Fudgy's going to be a good boy tonight. Very good for Daddy's friends. Good, Fudge said. Good boy. That's right, my mother told him. I changed and scrubbed up while Fudge finished his supper. I was going to eat with the company. Being 9 has its advantages. My mother was all dressed up by the time my father got home with the Yarbies. You'd never have guessed that my mom spent most of the day in the kitchen. You'd also never guess that Fudge ate 2 flowers. He was feeling fine. He even smelled nice, like baby powder. Mrs. Yarby picked them up right away. I knew she would. She looked like a grandmother, the type that always made a big deal out of Fudge. She walked into the living room cuddling him, then she sat down on the sofa and bounced Fudge on her lap. Isn't he the cutest little boy? Mrs. Yarby said. I just love babies. She gave him a big kiss on top of his head. I kept waiting for somebody to tell her Fudge was no baby, but nobody did. My father carried the Yarby suitcases into Fudge's room. When he came back, he introduced me to our company. This is our oldest son, Peter, he said to the Yarbys. I'm 9 and in the 4th grade, I told him. How do you do, Peter? Mr. Yarby said. Mrs. Yarby just gave me a nod. She was still busy with Fudge. I have a surprise for this dear little boy, she said. It's in my suitcase. Should I go get it? Yes, Fudge shouted. Go get! Go get! Mrs. Yarby laughed, as it was the best joke that she's ever heard. I'll be right back, she told Fudge. She put him down and ran off to find her suitcase. She came back carrying a present with a red ribbon. Oh, Fudge cried, opening his eyes wide. Goody! He clapped his hands. Mrs. Yarby helped him unwrap his surprise. It was a wind-up train that made a lot of noise. Every time it bumped into something, it turned around and went the other way. Fudge liked it a lot. He likes anything that's noisy. I said, That's a nice train. Mrs. Yarby turned to me. Oh, I have something for you too, Peter. I reminded her, my name's Peter. Yes, well, I'll go get it. Mrs. Jarby left the room again. This time, she came back with a flat package. It was wrapped up, too, red ribbon and all. She handed it to me. Fudge stopped playing with his train long enough to come over and see what I got. Took up the paper very carefully in case my mother wanted to save it, and also show Mrs. Jarby that I'm a lot more careful about things than my brother. I'm not sure that she noticed. My present turned out to be a big picture dictionary, the kind I liked when I was about 4 years old. My old one's in Fudge's bookcase now. I don't know much about big boys, Mrs. Jarby said, so the lady in the store said this was a nice book, and it would be a good idea. A nice book would have been a good idea, I thought, but a big picture dictionary? That's for babies. I had my own regular dictionary since I was 8. But I knew I had to be polite, so I said, Thank you very much. It's just what I've always wanted. I'm so glad, Mrs. Jarby said, and she let out a long sigh and sat back on the sofa. My father offered Yarbies a drink. Good idea, Mr. Yarby said. What'll it be? My father asked. What'll it be? Mr. Yarby repeated, laughing. What do you think, Hatcher? It'll be Juicio. That's all we ever drink. Good for your health. Mr. Yarby pounded his chest. Of course, my father said, like he knew all along. Juicio for everyone, my father told my mother. She went into the kitchen to get it. While my father and Mr. Yarby were discussing Juicio, Fudge disappeared. Just as my mother served everyone a glass of Mr. Yarby's favorite drink, he came back. He was carrying a book, my old worn-out picture dictionary. It's the same one as the Yarbys gave me. See, Fudge said, climbing up on Mrs. Yarby's lap. See, book? I wanted to vanish. I think my mother and father did too. See, book? Now Fudge held it over his head. I can use another one, I explained. I really can. That old one's falling apart. I tried to laugh. It's returnable, Mrs. Yarby said. It's silly to keep it if you already have one. She sounded insulted. Like it was my fault she bought me something I already had. Mine, Fudge said, closed the book and held it tight against his chest. Mine, mine, mine. It's the thought that counts, my mother said. It was so nice of you to think of our boys, and then she turned to Fudge. Put the book away now, Fudgy. Isn't it Fudgy's bedtime? My father hinted. Oh, yes, I think it is, she said, scooping him up. Say good night, Fudgy. Good night, Fudgy, my brother said, waving at us. Fudge was supposed to fall asleep before we sat down for dinner. but just in case, my mother puts a million little toys in his crib to keep him busy. I don't know who knows my mother thought she was fooling, because we all know Fudge can climb out of his crib any old time he wants to. He stayed away until we were in the middle of our roast beef. Then he came out carrying Dribble's bowl. He walked up to Miss Yarby. He thought she was his new friend. See? She said, holding Dribble under her nose. See, Dribble? Mrs. Yarby shrieked. Ooh, I can't stand reptiles. Get that thing away from me. Fudge looked disappointed, so he showed Dribble to Mr. Yarby. See? He said. Hatcher, Mr. Yarby boomed. Make him get that thing out of here. I wonder why Mr. Yarby called my father Hatcher. Didn't he know his first name was Warren? I didn't like the way Mr. and Mrs. Yarby both called Dribble a thing. I jumped up. Give him to me, I told Fudge. I took Dribble and his bowl and marched into my room. I inspected my turtle all over. He seemed all right. I didn't want to make a big scene in our company. But I was mad. I mean, really mad. That kid knows he's not allowed to touch my turtle. Peter, my father called. Come out and finish your dinner. When I got back to the table, I heard Mrs. Yarby say, It must be interesting to have children. We never had any ourselves. But if we did, Mr. Yarby told my father, we'd teach him some manners. I'm a firm believer in old-fashioned good manners. So are we, Howard, my father said in a weak voice. I thought Mr. Yarby had a lot of nerve to hint that we had no manners. I didn't pretend like their dumb old dictionary. If that isn't good manners, then I don't know what is. My mother excused herself and carried Fudge back to my room. I guess she put him in his crib again. I hope she told him to keep his hands off my fangs. We didn't hear from him again until dessert. Just as my mother was pouring coffee, he ran in wearing my rubber gorilla mask from last Halloween. It's a very real-looking mask. I guess that's why Mrs. Yarby screamed so loud. If she hadn't made so much noise, my mother probably wouldn't have spilt the coffee all over the floor. My father grabbed Fudge and pulled off the gorilla mask. That's not funny, Fudge, he said. Funny, Fudge laughed. Funny, funny, funny. Fudgy. Yes, sir, Hatcher, Mr. Yarby said. Old-fashioned manners. By that time, I was sure my father was sorry the Yarbys weren't staying at a hotel. I finally got to bed at 10. Fudge was in his crib, slurping away. I thought I'd never fall asleep. But I guess I did. And I woke up once when Fudge started babbling. He said, Boo ba mum mum hoppy he, whatever that means. I didn't even get scared. I whispered, shut up. And he did. Early the next morning, I felt something funny on my arm. At first, I didn't wake up. I just felt this little tickle. I thought it was part of my dream. But then I had the feeling somebody was staring at me, so I opened my eyes. Fudge was standing over me, and Dribble was crawling around on my arm. I guess Fudge could tell I was ready to kill him because he bent down and kissed me. That's what he does when my mother's angry at him. He thinks nobody can resist him when he makes himself so lovable. And a lot of times it works with my mother. But not with me. I jumped up, put Dribble back in his bowl, and smacked Fudge on his backside. Hard. He hollered. My father came running into my room. He was still in pajamas. He whispered, What's going on in here? I pointed at Fudge and he pointed at me. My father picked up my brother and carried him off. Go back to sleep, Peter. It's only 6 o'clock in the morning. I fell asleep for another hour, and then I woke up to an awful noise. It's Fudge playing with his new train. It woke everybody, including the Yarbys. So this time there was nobody they could blame. They were the ones who gave Fudge the train in the first place. Breakfast was a real quiet affair. Nobody had much to say. Mr. Yarby drank 2 glasses of Juicio. Then he told Father that he and Mrs. Yarby had their suitcases packed. They were leaving for a hotel as soon as breakfast was over. My father said he understood, that the apartment was too small for many people. My mother didn't say anything. When Mr. Yarby went into Fudge's bedroom to pick up his suitcase, his voice boomed, Hatcher! My father ran towards the bedroom. My mother and Mrs. Yarby followed him. They followed. I followed him. When they got there, they saw Fudge sitting on the Yarby's suitcase. He had decorated it with about 100 green stamps, the kind my mother gets at the supermarket. See, Fudge said. See, pretty? He laughed. No one else did. Then he licked the last green stamp and stuck it right in the middle of the suitcase. All gone, Fudge sang, holding up his hands. It took my mother half an hour to peel off her trading stamps and clean up the Yarby suitcase. The next week, Father came home from the office and collected all the cans of Juicio in our house. He dumped them into the garage. My mother felt bad that my father had left such an important account, but my father told her not to worry. Juicio wasn't selling well at stores. Nobody seemed to like the combination of oranges, grapefruits, pineapples, pears, and bananas. You know, Dad, I said, I only drank Juicio to be polite. I really hated it. You know something funny, Peter? My father asked, or said. I thought it was pretty bad myself.